Okay, in this video, we're going to be talking about the basics of Title I budgets. This is a key role of any SSC, and we want as many SSCs as possible to be armed with the understanding of how budgets work and what role the SSC plays in the budgeting of Title I dollars. So first, we're going to start with a description of how a school builds a highly effective school plan and how that fits into the budget cycle. So first, every school is required to create a school plan for student achievement, commonly referred to as a SIPSA. And we like to follow the same cycle to develop that plan throughout the year. You can see in this visual, we have a counterclockwise cycle starting with 1. And the first step is always a review of student data. We're looking for objective sources that can really describe the level of achievement for each student. Some data pieces are informal, some are more formal, but the idea is that we want a measure of our success, and using data is the only way forward that's going to really show us whether we made progress. From that data review, we're going to be able to see some deficits, and we're going to look at some students that are performing below their potential, or we might see areas that really need us to shine a flashlight into our organization and improve. So the next step is what we would call a root cause analysis, meaning that if we see students or groups of students that are underperforming, we want to look a little bit deeper, and we want to better understand the causes of that lower than expected performance. So site leaders would perform an investigation about student performances and really look at what the cause is so that we can target those causes with some goals. Our goals should be built on data sources that our teacher teams and our site teams value, meaning that we don't think that schools will be motivated to achieve better if they don't really believe in the data point used to measure their success or their level of achievement. So we would want to create goals specifically in the areas that our data review points out as being an area of need. So with those goals in mind, we would develop some strategies, some things that we're going to do in hopes of improving the data and meeting our goals. And then finally, after our plan has been implemented, we always want to look back and conduct a review of each expenditure and each strategy to determine whether that expenditure was effective in improving student achievement or whether we need to abandon it for a new approach moving forward. So you can see here, we use this cycle to develop a site plan, and that site plan is going to include a budget or a list of expenditures that are going to support the strategies illuminated in step 4. So now, when we build a budget, we think about it like a filing cabinet. Okay, so you can picture this filing cabinet has that top drawer pulled out, and inside there are several hanging files with papers inside. So the cabinet is like the full school budget. Each drawer is like a different resource. And then within each drawer, there are sets of accounts. And you could have the same account in each different resource, but the account really narrows down what those funds are being used for. So accounts separate funds by actual use, meaning some are time cards, some are substitutes, and some are actual purchases of items. Now, these resources are separated by the intended use of the fund. So for instance, Title I funds are really meant for a certain group of students and can be used in certain ways, whereas visual and performing arts, Prop 28 funds, are meant for a completely different use, and those two things would be housed in different resources. They could both have the same accounts, but the overall target of those funds are different. Okay, thinking about the specifics of SSC. The SSC's primary function is to monitor and approve the use of federal funds. And by that, we mean Title I funds. So what does that really mean? When we think about Title I, we think about our nation's efforts to address the inequities that we know exist in our country. So if you look at the visual here, we can see that this image taken from Shel Silverstein's The Giving Tree, there's one side of the tree that is heavily laden with fruit and opportunity, whereas another side of the tree doesn't have as much fruit, and it's a little bit harder for that child. But we can put supports in place such that both of the children, regardless of their circumstances, have enough to fill up their satchel. This is the basic idea of what we're doing with Title I funds. Here, Title I funds would represent the ladder intended to support that student's achievement so that they have the same opportunity to fill up their satchel or have their needs met as other students whose need is maybe a little bit different. So we might ask ourselves, how does the federal government contribute to creating this more equitable school system? And specifically, Title I resources come from the federal government for the specific purpose of closing the achievement gap as measured by state testing. Now, there's a lot of differing opinions about state testing, but the reality is that it is a standards-based, objective approach that removes educator bias as much as possible to really get a picture of a student's ability. And it's correlated to our own state standards in ways that we know that if a student is successful on that exam, they are making adequate progress. Okay, so now to the specifics of Title I funds. Here we have that same filing cabinet, and specific to Title I, we're going to talk about certain resources like Title I Basic. So Title I Basic is part of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, which provides federal money to support economically disadvantaged students and to close achievement gaps, academic achievement gaps specifically. In the world of Title I or SSC, we would call this resource 30100, 30100. A second resource commonly budgeted in Title I is Title I Parent Involvement, 30103. And these funds are specifically targeting the ability of the schools to get parents to come on campus and get involved in ways that really improve student achievement. We know that parent involvement and parent understanding about their role in the educational process is critical to student development, and we want parents involved in the development of their child's academics. And then finally, in very rare cases, each year there's just a handful of school sites in San Diego Unified that qualify for Comprehensive Support and Improvement Funds, commonly referred to as CSI funds. These are funds that provide extra support to improve student achievement from low or declining to maintaining and improving as measured by the California School Dashboard. Again, these are sites that really need some extra level of funding and interventions in order to get things back on track and headed in the right direction. Okay, so again, the three resources are Title I Basic, Title I Parent Involvement, and CSI. Okay, so when we take that school plan and we budget in dollars needed to support the strategies, we actually end up with a budget document that I'm going to share here. So this is what a school would commonly look at in terms of the actual budget. So you see here, we have the two resources, Title I Basic and Title I Parent Involvement. And then within those two resources, we have the different accounts. So we have two drawers here. In the top drawer, we have several accounts and those hanging files. And then in the bottom drawer, we just have these two hanging files down here. In this document, you can see different key aspects of what's happening in current real time of the budget. It's important to note that these numbers in the middle here, program, class, fund, and extended, they're used by district accountants to track expenditures on a organizational scale, and they're really not relevant to the actual work of an SSC. So we recommend kind of deleting these columns or looking past these, because sometimes they can cloud our ability to understand the budget because it's just so much information. Now these two amounts here, the bottom of the budget column for Title I Basic, that shows how much this school site was actually granted during the budget process. So this school had $159,242 budgeted in the beginning. And then this column over here shows how much is left. Okay, so we started with $159,000 and we have about $71,000 left. And you can see in here the dollars are left in certain budgeted accounts. So yeah, this gives you a sense of how much money is left to spend. And then these columns here are used to communicate how much is in the process of being spent, but not quite completely expensed. So there's a couple of items here. First of all, we see that penned P-card column. That is kind of like the school's debit card. So when they make a purchase after their debit card, it gets debited out of their budget and the amount would show up in that column. That's only used in rare circumstances for small dollar amounts. The majority of expenditures start as a pre-encumbrance. So when a school wants to purchase a notebook, they enter a requisition and it becomes a pre-encumbrance while the purchase is being approved. So for Title I, our office would be the first approver. Actually, the principal is the first approver, then we would approve, and then it goes to strategic sourcing. And once the approvers have all gone through and agree it's a good purchase, we will issue a purchase order, and then those dollars become an encumbrance. So now that purchase order is sent to the vendor. In this case, let's say Staples. Staples gets the purchase order. They go to the shelf, they get the binder, and they send the binder to the school site. When the school site gets the binder, then Staples gets paid. And when the vendor's paid and we have the item, in this case the binder, then these dollars become an expense. And the objective of our budget is to expense every dollar in our budget. So I'm going to show you an example of that in a minute. But I talked a little bit about the approval process, and that is part of one of the strings that come attached with Title I dollars. So the federal government gives us these dollars with the understanding that we're going to follow certain rules. So just some of the rules. Now there are a lot, but just for the focus of the SSC, Title I grant funds require the formation of an SSC under certain criteria. That SSC needs to develop a school plan for student achievement that shows that we've done a needs assessment. It shows that we've created some goals. It shows that we've created some strategies to address the goals. And then it shows all of our budgeted dollars that support the strategies, that support the goals, that address the student needs. So when a proper SPSA is done, we should have a through line that goes all the way from our data analysis and our needs assessment through to goals, to strategies that support the goals, to expenditures that we need to make the strategies happen. Now, sometimes things need to change. And one of the strings attached is that anytime the site changes their strategic plan, or their site plan or their school plan or their SIPSA, that needs the approval of the SSC. Okay. So now another thing is that any of the expenditures, any of the items that we're going to buy need to be evidence-based and they need to target core instruction. So I'm going to talk about that a little bit later, but essentially any purchase that the Title I dollars make needs to support the student in their English, math, science, or history classes. We can't purchase things for electives, art classes, not to say that those are not valuable, but we have other funds to support those. Title I is specific to core instruction. And then finally, the expenditures have to be targeted to improve student achievement as measured by state standardized tests. We can use other data points to predict the student's progress, but ultimately, federal funds need to be supporting the state's effort to improve achievement as measured by the standardized tests. So now, this is the ultimate financial goal. This is what we ideally hope to see at the end of the year in every school. In this example, you can see that the two columns, the budgeted and expensed, are perfectly matching. Every dollar that was budgeted for this school was spent, literally every dollar. So that at the end of the year, we were granted $159,242 and we spent that exact same amount, and the same for the Title I parent involvement funds. But there's more to the story. So these items, services, and contracts purchased with Title I should be above and beyond what the district is required to provide. We call this the supplemental test for Title I purchases, meaning that we cannot keep our dollar and use a Title I dollar to buy something that we needed to buy to make the school run. All Title I purchases have to be above and beyond the items that the district is required to provide. Purchases should be evidence-based, meaning that there should be unbiased research showing that the purchase or strategy has been proven to work. The purchase should support core instruction, meaning math, English, history, and science classes. And the purchases should be used to benefit students attending the school this year. Our intention is not to support next year or for multi-year contracts. These funds were granted specific for the kids this year. And then finally, purchases should be reviewed for effectiveness each year. If we know we are doing something that did not work, we want to stop that practice and implement something that we believe will work. The school should specifically address the needs of students whose achievement is below that level of their peers. We really want to make sure that we're addressing students with greater needs. So you might ask yourself, what can SSE teams do to help the school not only meet the spending deadlines, but to implement a really effective plan? First of all, we want to make sure that we have quorum, or more than 50% plus one, of the members in every meeting. For our SSE to function, we need to hear input from all educational partner groups, including, in many cases, students themselves. We want to encourage the review of the budget in each SSC meeting. This holds the school site accountable for reviewing it on a regular basis, and it serves as a good reminder to them about what funds need to be spent and how much of a plan we have for the remaining funds. We want to start spending early, meaning that if we have subscriptions to buy, we want to buy them early. If we have professional developments that we're providing for teachers, we want to provide those early so that we get the maximum benefit of those expenditures throughout the school year. We want to know and communicate the budget timelines, not only amongst our school teams, but also parents. Our team plays a role in that we want to have timely approval for requisitions. When a school requests requisitions that need to be approved, our office does our part to get those approved expeditiously. We want to make sure that any realignment for surplus budgets from staff are done early. So we don't want to be a surprise. We don't want to have a surprise near the end of the year where we had this chunk of money that was sitting there that didn't get repurposed, and that would leave us holding those funds. Okay, so we're near the end of this presentation, but I think it's very important to point out what the point of all of this is, what the point of Title I and SSC and all the work that we put behind these funds is. Now, first of all, we do have a financial goal. Remember, we want every dollar spent. The school doesn't get these funds back if they don't spend them. They are brought back into the district and then redistributed to sites the next year. But your school wants to spend all of its dollars on its students this year. But that's really not the end of the goal of these funds. The real purpose is building a better community. We know that if we have high achievement in English language arts, where students are challenged to create an opinion and defend that opinion with facts and become critical thinkers and critical readers, we know our community will be improved. We know that if our students are armed with the ability to understand numbers and statistics and all of the math that is present in our daily life, they will not only be better consumers and better budgeting of their own monies, they will also be better contributors to our society in general. We know that if we maximize learning opportunities around negative behaviors and minimize exclusionary practices such as suspension, where really the student just gets a day off and they miss that instruction and further compound their own academic struggles, we know that if we reduce that, our community will benefit in many ways, and we will see less recidivism of these behaviors rather than the typical traditional just get out of here for a day approach. And then finally, we know that our community has an extreme asset in our bilingual learners. And we know that if we maximize the potential of our young people who are prime candidates to be truly bilingual, meaning bilingual in their home language, literate in their home language, while also being literate in the predominant language of English, we know that San Diego, or specifically our community, will benefit greatly. And this is really what this is all about, is building a better San Diego, a better California, and maybe even a better country. So, all right, next steps, armed with this information, we really hope that you'll join your SSC in further dialogue about how to build a really strong and effective school plan for your site's use of Title I dollars. Thank you so much for helping us accomplish that goal.